right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. In Ogallala, can you hear us?
3 is Sharon. So.
Yes.
2 a.m. there.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, for those who don't know me, I'm Joel with Region 2 Youth Care, and today we have Sharon from Lead Family Advocate and Families Care.
No, I'm not with Families Care.
Not with Families Care, okay. And so I'll let you come up here and just kind of introduce yourself and go from there.
Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank you for the wonderful cold weather for me to come to North Platte. It's warmer in Lincoln this morning than it is here. But I am the Nebraska System of Care Lead Family Contact. I have a contract with the state of Nebraska to do the family piece. So I do trainings for families, work with the family, and provide trainings to providers and agencies to help families best. Can you guys hear me okay? And with Cook and Ogallala? No? Okay, I'll talk louder. Like I said, I'm Sharon Darrell. I'm the Nebraska System of Care Lead Family Contact, so I work across the whole state of Nebraska on behalf of families. And one of the things I do is trainings to help people get a better grasp of what families might be going through. I am a family member. I raised a child in the mental health system, and I also have a daughter who has Down syndrome sclerosis. I raised her in the developmental disability realm, so I've had my share of all the systems. And so, and I've been doing this for 20 years as a family advocate, and now I'm hoping to pass the torch in the next couple of years. But one of the things that I am really passionate about is when we hear comments a lot about, well, we can't engage families. Families just don't participate. Families don't care. I always take a step back and ask people, have you thought maybe they're going through a grieving process? That's just not something we think of when we think of our kids in the mental health field. When my daughter was born, I had the luxury of people telling me, this is what you will go through. You will grieve the process. You will grieve of all the dreams that you had for your child. You will grieve all the transition times in her life. But when my son was diagnosed, they gave him a diagnosis and said, move forward. They didn't tell me that I'm also going to have those same feelings. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, McCook, but we can't see you. Oh, there you are.
Here I am.
Yeah, sorry, you're out of the screen the whole time. It's just easier to see who we're listening to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
I have to stand by the desk? Okay, got it.
Yep, don't move.
I'm not a technology person.
Okay.
So, when someone's child is diagnosed with a mental, behavioral, and or emotional health challenge, they begin a new journey. It's not the journey that they thought they were going to live. And through this journey, they may go through a grieving process, and it's important to recognize it and let them know that it's okay and that it's normal. And families will not engage with the services if they are going through some of these processes. So why grief? Their child has not passed away, so why do we call it grieving? Anybody know why we would call it grieving if somebody didn't pass away?
Because it's kind of stunning, just like a death. It like hits you like, so what am I supposed to do now?
Right.
When you lose somebody, sometimes you feel like that also.
And you're exactly right. It's a loss. We as humans go through a grieving process in a lot of different times in our lives and not even realize we're doing it. We lose a job. We lose our house. We're diagnosed with cancer. Every time that something changes in our life, we may go through a grieving process and not realize it. But we have all these feelings and we don't know why we have these feelings. So they may grieve the loss of what they thought their child was going to be. When we have children, we all have dreams and hopes for our children, right? A lot of times when your child is diagnosed with something, even when my daughter was born with Down syndrome, the first thing they did was tell me everything she would never do in her life. That she would never graduate, that she would never get married, that she would never have children, that she would never work, that she would never be independent. And my response to them is, can you guarantee my son will do all those things? Where's the guarantee in life? Well, my daughter graduated from high school. My son did not. So it's expectations of people telling us what. So then we even grieve harder because of everything they will never do. So you have their hopes and dreams of who they are and who they will become. Loss of a lifestyle, adding the treatment needed, adjustments necessary to parent a child with serious mental challenges or behavioral health challenges. Your life changes. It changes drastically. You're no longer just going to work, coming home. Loss of future dreams and aspirations for your child. And the first thing that we think of as parents when our child is diagnosed is we tend to go right there. Well, my child will never do this. My child now is diagnosed with mental health diagnosis. He will never go to college. But that's not even reality. But that's where our minds go as parents. Loss of hope for what kind of parent you are, who you envisioned yourself to be as a parent. Changes are necessary when parenting a child with challenges. How many of you have worked with parents who the first thing they do is blame themselves? What did I do wrong? What could have I done differently? I even did that with my daughter when she was born. The first thing I said is, what did I do wrong while I was pregnant? Well, there's nothing you can do to change things. So what is grief? It is a normal and natural emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. And we just talked about that piece of it. That there's a lot of things in our lives that we lose, that we grieve. Some of us grieve for our childhood. I've decided I don't want to be an adult no more. Some of us grieve for what was in our past. And the hardest thing to do is let go of things. And that delays the grieving process. We often associate grieving when someone close to us dies. However, there are many other circumstances when a person may grieve. Like I said, such as a loss of job, relationships that end, or any other traumatic event in their life. You know, you might have a fire in your house. You grieve that. Can anybody think of times in their life that they might have been grieving and not realizing they were grieving? Besides when you lose somebody through death? I bet we all can come up with something in our lives that we've gone through this process. Sometimes when a child is diagnosed with any type of disability, the parent may go through a grieving process and they may be grieving all that they had hoped and dreamed for their child. But it's important to recognize not all parents will go through this. So we can't make the assumption that that's what parents are feeling. If they are grieving, the most important thing that we can do to help families is to recognize it and normalize it. Let them know it's okay, but also help them not live there in that place. So something to understand, some things that you might want to understand and keep in mind when someone is going through the grieving process is what they are feeling is real. The one thing I think we can all agree on is we don't always have a whole lot of control over how we feel. Our emotions come and go. What they are feeling is normal. And it's okay to say to a parent, you know, I understand that you're upset about this, and that's normal. But we'll get through it. Every person will grieve in their own way and in their own time. It's not for me to tell a parent after the child was diagnosed a month later, I say, get over it, move on. That's not for me to say to a parent. Everybody grieves in their own process. And some parents will grieve over and over and over through different transitions, every time they get a phone call from a school, their child can't go to a youth group because of their behaviors. They may grieve that loss of that friendship piece with kids. No one can tell someone else what is appropriate for them. What they are going through may not always be understood or accepted by others, and they could be feeling isolated and hopeless. Sometimes parents can't share their feelings with others because others don't understand, especially within the family. It's like, we'll deal with it. Others don't necessarily understand that the parent is going through this process. Grieving can be healthy if we recognize it for what it is and work through the grief in a healthy way. It's much better for everybody if we work through the grief rather than hold it within ourselves. Because I'm sure we've all had emotions that we hold within ourselves, and in the end, it can destroy us. With grief, there is always hope. The parent may go through the process many times in their child's life. I was one of these obstinate parents that whenever somebody told me what my child would not ever do, I would guarantee that my child would do it. When grieving, there are different stages a person will typically go through. There's the denial or fear, the guilt, the anger, the depression, and the acceptance. So let's go through each of the stages. Denial or fear. Denial is telling themselves and others that it's not true, and convincing themselves that the professionals are all wrong. There's nothing wrong with my child. Fear could include the fear of the future and what it means for their child and their family. Fear may also include being afraid of what others may think. My child's been diagnosed with a mental health challenge. What's other people going to think about me as a parent? Both denial and fear are real emotions and are normal. If we tell ourselves enough times that it's not real, then it must not be real, right? And that everybody else around me is wrong. So part of this process is helping people understand that the better we get to acceptance, the more we can do for our child and family. Because as long as we're denying it, we're not moving forward and helping our child. Anger, blaming others, which could include the professionals or sometimes even their child. Why can't you be like other kids? Have you ever heard a parent say that to a child? And sometimes we're even angry at ourselves as parents. Or sometimes denial and anger are intertwined and the feelings may be intense. So when you're angry and you're in denial at the same time, and you're going through this really intense time of being angry at the world. I don't want to do anything, and I'm yelling at everybody because I can't accept what's going on. We all know parents like that. But it's a real feeling because they haven't learned to deal with that anger piece of it. Guilt. As a parent, they may feel guilty and ask themselves things like, is this my fault? And did I do something wrong? And that's one of the fears of parents, is because they're being judged with their child. And they do hear that. The first thing I heard about my son when he was 3 years old is, it's all your fault, you don't know how to parent your child. So of course my feelings just got more intense and I wouldn't seek out help anymore. the parents may go through this, woulda, coulda, shoulda. What could have I done differently? What should have I done differently? If I knew then what I know now, what would have I done differently? But the reality is we really have to help parents understand it doesn't matter, really, it really doesn't matter what happened before your child was diagnosed. Because what can we go back and change? Don't we all have something in our lives we'd like to go back and change? But we can't. We have to learn to accept and move forward. And the next one is depression, feeling of hopelessness, having a difficult time functioning and are isolating themselves. One of the things I hear from families parents a lot is, I just don't want to get out of bed. I just don't want to deal with what's going on in my life. If a parent is feeling that way every morning, how are we going to engage them in services if we don't work through that piece first? Can any of you think of families in your mind while we go through this that might be going through some of these pieces? It's just kind of a different way of looking at things. It's, you know, we want families to engage. We want them to get their services. We want them to get their help, and we want them to get them out of the systems. That's our goals, right? But we also have to help them deal, because this is not going to be a one-time thing for a lot of families. Like I said, this could happen over and over and over. While all their kids' friends are going on to college, their kids may not be able to because they're not functioning well enough at that time, that they will go through this process again. And we have families who their kids can't go to summer camp because of their behaviors, or they can't go to the church youth group because of their behaviors. Parents will go through this process. Anybody have any questions about these stages here? Do you have any good examples that we could share?
Well, we just finished up with a family that, because they were in foster care, I would say I saw a lot of guilt on his part because they were in foster care. So then we saw a lot of behaviors that he didn't address and would not, because of the guilt. And like, you know, but then didn't want to allow that behavior, but didn't know how to, because of the guilt, not, you know, try to detour the behavior until it got really escalated.
And that's a good point. Your kids that are going into foster care or going into treatment centers that are going into out-of-home placements or whatever their situations are, the families will go through this process. Especially when a child is put into foster care, because then you really start feeling the guilt of, what should I have done differently? And most of our parents and I'm going to say all of our parents whose kids go into foster care, they love their kids. I always tell people, nobody gave me a book on how to raise a child, let alone a child with needs, let alone 2 children with needs.
Right.
So, people don't give us that information when our kids are born. But it's really important to recognize that the feelings are there. The feelings are very, very real. And that's the best thing we can do to our families in helping them forward, is to help them start recognizing that for themselves, so the next time they go through that, they'll be able to recognize it themselves and deal with it and have a plan in place to deal with it. Anybody else have an example or have any questions or?
Just an insight on this. I think that you can kind of see parents are going through their own struggles, and the family is going through their own struggles at a time when their child probably needs them to be a superhero during this time. So it just kind of feeds into, the whole cycle feeds into itself, and it can become kind of a vicious circle with what happens. And then I think that's where parents a lot of times get stuck in some of these places, is because nothing ever seems to get better. And the child, I mean, their mental health issues are sometimes being amplified because of the functioning struggle within the family because of the behavior to begin with, so.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you understand that when you're going through this as a parent, I mean, your child is diagnosed, it's like a slap in the face. You know, with my daughter, it was at birth. It was easier to deal with looking backwards because it was right from the start. But when you've got this active 3, 4, 5-year-old, and all of a sudden, boom, I mean, that's a hard thing. That would be just like somebody having a child who is maybe gets a brain injury when they're 6 years old and their life changes. It's the same concept. Your life changes. And going back to the feeling the guilty as a parent, a lot of times as parents what we do is start compensating. Oh, my child does that because of his diagnosis. Rather than dealing with the behavior, we start excusing the behavior. Because our guilt is taking over. Does that make sense? Cook, Ogallala, any questions, any comments?
Nope, none here, I'm a cook.
None in Ogallala.
Okay. So how to help and support someone deal with their feelings of denial, fear, anger, guilt, and or depression. Recognize what they are feeling to help them. Recognize what they are feeling is okay. So it's our role is to help them recognize it and to also help them recognize that this is okay. And this is a normal part of the process. And that this is the first step to learning to let go of them. You've got to acknowledge what you're going through in order to let go of it. Encourage them to talk about how they are feeling. But we also have to draw a line there because we will burn bridges if we talk about it all the time. And it will start to consume us. So I would help them pinpoint one person, 1 or 2 people that they feel comfortable talking about it with. And then I would encourage them to go out and to have coffee or tea or whatever with that person to have that conversation. Help them reach out to others who have gone through the experiences. So help them reach out to others who've gone through it. Support groups. There's support groups for families whose kids have mental or behavioral health challenges. You know, and if you have families that their child has gone to foster care, there's support groups for that. There's support groups for developmental disabilities. So there are places to reach out. And if there aren't support groups, there are the family organizations to help families go through this process. Questions? Don't be afraid to ask. How are you feeling today? Oh, I just didn't want to get out of bed this morning. Well, why didn't you want to get out of bed this morning? Tell me about it. What can we do to help change that? So it's just don't be afraid to ask. And that's even, you can say, you know, I see that you don't want to really engage right now with services. Is there something going on? Are you feeling a certain way? Let's talk about it. Let's see how we can help you. Because they may not know why they're feeling the way they're feeling. They may feel guilty about the way they're feeling. You know, when I was going through the anger phase, you know, and I went through with both my kids. I never got angry at them. I got angry more at myself. Because I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I wasn't doing anything anymore because I was giving up. Well, then I got to the point, well, if I give up, then they're going to give up. Research the diagnosis and best evidence practice services to help their child. Help them do research on it. Because you know what? A diagnosis sometimes sounds a heck of a lot scarier than it really is. You know, when people hear, gosh, your child has autism, they get really afraid. But if you look it up, there are some really successful kids with autism. And one of the things I've done with families is have them look at even celebrities and professionals that have those diagnoses. Because the word is scary. But the future doesn't have to be if we have the information. Don't push them to try and take it on all at one time. Don't have them research and deal with their grief and go to therapy and go to their child's therapist. Don't ask them to do everything at one time. That becomes very overwhelming, and what are families going to do? If families are overwhelmed, what are they going to do? Shut down. Shut down and give up. And then they're going to go back into their isolation. Sometimes you take it one day at a time. And when I was going through this stuff with my daughter, because she also had really bad health problems when she was born, my mother always said, take it one day at a time. And one day I called her and I said, I just can't even do this one day at a time anymore. Her response is 1 minute at a time. Because that's sometimes what we need to do, 1 minute at a time. Continuously remind them that no parent knows what the future holds for their child. I always go back to, everybody wants a normal child, right? When we're pregnant, that's what we want. We want a normal child. Well, what's normal? I had a really insightful 18-year-old youth tell me about 10 years ago and he had severe mental health challenges, and he says, the only thing that I know that's normal is Normal Boulevard in Lincoln, Nebraska. That's what normal is. It's in streets. And we have to help parents understand that. None of us know what the future is for our kids. We may have all the dreams in the world for our child, but when our children start getting older, they start making their own decisions on their life. It's not necessarily what we had dreamed when they were born. Help them set up a wellness plan. And there's a lot of good wellness plans out there that they have it right in front of them, so when they start feeling some of this stuff, they can go back to it. It's kind of like, do we all know what the RAP plan is? You can even use a RAP plan to help parents deal with grief and have a plan in place. Because sometimes we just don't know when it's going to hit us. Once someone has gone through these phases, they will come to the acceptance. And with acceptance comes the strength to move forward, recognizing that though their child may face some challenges, he or she is still the same child they were before the diagnosis. If my child's been having behaviors for 5 years and then gets diagnosed, what's really changed? Besides the diagnosis. Oh, and now they have more information to help their child to be the best that they can be. That diagnosis is a tool to help them get the information they need to help their child. And while parents are going through this, the other thing that we really have to keep in mind is it's not only our child that's diagnosed that made our life change. We as a family have to change everything in our lives. We have to start looking at things differently. We have to start doing things differently. Some of us, our kids' behaviors are so bad that we can't go out to dinner. Well, do we really go out to dinner and struggle, or do we just say, oh, let's have a picnic on the ground at home? So there's ways to do stuff without making it into a fight. And that's the hardest thing sometimes for parents to understand. It's not only our child that has to change, it's us that has to change also. And we have to help other people understand change is not a bad thing. Change is good. Don't we all like change? I've seen some no, not so much. But we can look at change in so many different ways. Change is scary, that's for sure. But you know how many times we actually do change during our day? I might have laid out some chicken at home for supper. But you know what, I'm just going to stop and get a hamburger on the way home. I just changed. So we have to start looking at, we really go through change all the time. We just don't recognize it for change. So grief is like the ocean. It comes on waves ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water is calm and sometimes it is overwhelming. All we can do is learn to swim. And if today's a bad day, that doesn't mean tomorrow's not a new day. And you start all over every day. So going through the grieving process may not happen only once. The process may reoccur at different times and with each new transition of the child's life. This is also normal. And we have to understand that the grieving process is not a certain order. My first reaction might be anger. And then I might go to denial. And I may never get depressed through the process because my anger is overwhelming. So you're not necessarily going to go through all the stages. But the one thing that we all have to get to with our families need to get to is acceptance to move forward. Otherwise, we are standing still and not moving. So some things you can do to help someone going through the grieving process and to help and support them. Have them journal their feelings. And the other really neat way to journal now is through drawing, art journaling. As they write them out, they can begin the healing process. And some families that I have worked with on this process, they write it out and then they burn it. Once they've burned it, it's done. Move forward. And they make their decisions. I don't do it for them. Some keep them and some get rid of them as soon as they write it out. Encourage them to take a walk when the feelings arise. And on the walk, help them learn to think about only the positive, not the pain and the loss. Has anybody ever heard of mindful walking? I've gotten into the practice of mindfulness. It helped me quit smoking this summer. And what I do is I take walks and I don't think about anything. I listen, I use my senses. I listen, what can I hear? What can I see? What can I feel? And what can I smell? And when you're focused on that stuff, you can't think of the other things because you're focused on the here and now. And so it's really a helpful tool to get through the grieving process. Encourage them to turn to their spirituality and helping them find peace and hope, whatever that may be. Some people go to church, some people don't, some people go out to nature for their spirituality, whatever helps them. And they might want to combine the spirituality piece and journaling. Maybe they want to go out to, I wouldn't advise it today because it's cold out, but go out to the park and just sit and write. But I would really encourage them to do these things without the children. Because it's hard to focus on your walking and your senses if you've got a child that's not listening and doing whatever they want to do. Help them develop a wellness plan, which we've already talked about. Help them come up with a plan with personal goals and actions. If they have something else to focus on, it helps with the pain and the loss. So help them set personal goals and help them work on those personal goals. And that could be maybe they want to take an art class. So how can we make that happen for you? Because that helps them. Personal goals help them through the processes. And if they learn new tools and new skills like that, that's going to help them get through the processes and move on through the next transition or whatever it may be. But they have to have things to fall back on it. Otherwise, if we don't have anything in our lives besides the pain and the loss, that's all we focus on. That's all we talk about. We live and breathe that pain and loss. But if we have new things or other things, it helps us start less and less and less with the pain and loss. things they like to do. So when they find themselves going in that place of the grieving process, they can pick something off that list. And it might even be have them make a list, cut them up, fold them into little pieces of paper, put them in a jar. And so when they start going to that place of not feeling so good or depression, they can pull something out of that jar. And it's always available to them. Remind them to practice good self-care. By practicing good self-care, they will be better able to cope with and overcome the challenges they may face with their child in their life. How many of you hear that at work? Take care of yourself, otherwise you can't take care of others. There's a reason that when you get in an airplane, they always tell you to put their oxygen mask wearer first. On the person you're with. On yourself first, before you help the person next to you. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't help anybody. And that's something we always have to continuously remind our families. Because we're a society of, if we do self-care, we feel like we're being selfish. But actually, self-care and selfishness doesn't have anything to do with each other. You have to do self-care in order to be a productive person. And even in your roles working with families, it's good to have tools of self-care, so when you have a stressful day or you have a hard family, or then you have something to fall back on. And with families, the hardest thing we're so busy raising our kids, especially ones with high needs. We are so busy raising them, we're not doing anything for ourselves. Well, then our kids move away from home and they grow up, and then what? We have nothing to fall back on because we've given everything up in our lives. So it's really important to keep that going as we move forward. Help understand the importance for them to continue their relationships with others. Help them understand that it's important. If you have a husband, go on a date night. It's important to do that. And don't go on a date night and talk about the child the whole time. Spend one-on-one time with your other children. Because siblings are the ones who are usually pushed to the side. Because you're so busy with one. So it's important for us to help families understand that they have to have that one-on-one relationship. Go out with your best friend. Go to that basketball game. Go out for coffee. Go to that movie. And that's okay. And I know the hardest thing for some families is that respite. I get that. But you know you can have a date night at home after your kid goes to bed. Put in a movie, put away your phones, and you have a date night. So there's ways to get around that. Help them look into mindfulness, which I just talked about, of being in the here and the now. We so often spend our time as parents of focusing on the future, of everything our children will never do, instead of living in the here and now, and realize that every day is a miracle, and every day our children do something wonderful, but we don't focus on that. So help our families understand that. Please focus on the here and now. Don't worry about it. I have no control over what can happen tomorrow. So it's important for me to focus on what I'm doing right now. How many of us focus on tomorrow more than we focus on today? Help them make a list of truths, the good and bad of the situation that has caused the hurt and pain, the truths. Okay, my child just got diagnosed with autism. What's the truth about autism?
You know one kid with autism, you know one kid with autism.
What?
If you know one kid with autism, you know one kid with autism.
Yep. So what would not, so is it a truth if my child is diagnosed with autism that they'll never graduate from high school? Is that a truth? Take it out of your mind because it's not a truth. Is it a truth that my child will never go to college if they have autism? No. Take it out of your mind. So let's make a list of truths. The truth about autism. There's one truth about autism. It's a mental health diagnosis. Period. That's the only truth. Because no two children are the same. Would you agree with that statement? Some kids with autism can't be around other people, some kids with autism can. Some kids with autism speak clearly, some kids with autism have a hard time communicating. So there's one truth about autism, and everything else is fiction. And that's the same with just about every diagnosis. It's a diagnosis. It doesn't mean anything for their future. The future is what our child makes their future. My son was diagnosed with ODD and severe depression and tried to commit suicide several times. But he went into the Army National Guard. Now, if I would have lived with the idea that if you have a diagnosis you can't do that, he wouldn't have ever been able to do that. But he didn't let it stop him. He didn't get his he didn't graduate from high school, but he got his GED because he had to get that to go into the Army National Guard. But that was his life and his future to plan, not mine. Have them begin a gratitude journal. You know, if you think of all the positive things in your life, it's hard to think of the negative. And once you start the journal, the first day I suggest somebody write down 5 things they're grateful for and add 2 every day. You know, we are a society that focuses on the negatives in our lives. We automatically go there. And I'm not sure why, but we do. But when you start doing a journal, if you start doing a comparison, and I did this for about a month, of all the negatives in my life and all the positives, guess which list was longer? The positives. Help them identify a person they can call when they start having these feelings. You know, sometimes you just need that one best friend. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's your mother. Maybe it's your sister, maybe it's your brother, you know. The one thing I would definitely not suggest is having them talk about those feelings in front of their child or any of their children. Because children take in what we as parents say. So if we start talking negatively about things, they're going to start living that. That's just like if we tell our kid they're a bad kid enough, they're going to start being a bad kid. In their minds. I don't believe there's anything such thing as a bad kid. There's kids that do bad things, but that's what they start hearing. You know, every time we take our kids to the hospital or to a therapist or psychiatrist, and our child is sitting there and we're telling them, this doctor, whoever, everything negative that's going on in this child's life. And the more we talk about the negative, the more we as parents also start internalizing that and start going through the grieving process again. Help them research ideas for new interests they could take up. This will help them to have something new to focus on. It goes back to the goals. Most of us, we have something in our life that we've always wanted to try or learn, but we just don't. This is a good time to help parents bring that out again. Or maybe it's something they used to love to do and then they have kids and they don't have the time anymore. Because even go through all this stuff with my kids, the one thing I never lost was doing my crafts. That was my out. When my kids were in bed at night, I would sit for hours and do my crafts. Research social groups they could join, any group that fits their interests. So maybe it could be a book club. It doesn't have anything to do with their child, but maybe they want to join a support group because of their child. It's whatever interests them. Encourage them to volunteer if they have the time. Most of your parents will say, I don't have the time. But sometimes it's 1 hour a week at the school. I remember when I was growing up, my mom would spend an hour every week at the school. Nowadays, we just don't do that as often as we did when I was growing up. But if your child is really struggling at school, that's a good place to volunteer. Because the child sees you giving your time to the school, so they're more willing to give their time to the school. Encourage them to talk about their feelings with a friend, family member, or therapist, which we've already talked about. Does anybody else have any other suggestions of what you might do with families to help them go through this process? So after hearing this, do you have any ideas of how you can help identify that with families? Ogalala, McCook, have any ideas of how you can help identify this?
You have to get to know them. I mean, there's not a blanket identification for each family, so you have to get to know the family as much as they're willing to get to know you to be able to help them identify.
And you do, you have to give them time and space to do that,
Right.
because getting that trust, because a lot of parents, if you go in and say, are you really grieving this? They're not going to admit it, because you know what? If I say I'm really depressed, or I'm angry, or I don't agree with any of this, what does that make me look like?
Unfit.
A what?
Maybe unfit. They're gonna feel unfit.
And it's going to make me feel very weak as a parent. Or I'm doing something wrong because I have these feelings. What is wrong with me?
I think you have to be careful too that you don't push your own experience on them, that, oh, I know how you're feeling. You need to validate how they're feeling, because just like you were talking about the whole presentation, everybody goes through this process differently. Every situation is different. So just because you have a similar situation doesn't mean what worked for you works for them. And
we have to accept that even in our own lives, because we lose people in our lives. For each person we lose in our life, we grieve differently. And some of them we grieve longer than others. I mean, and we have to accept that of parents too. Of the, But if when I was going through with my son, if I would have told one of the people that was working with us in one of these treatment centers that I am really angry at him because he has this feeling that he's doing this, I just look like a really bad parent because I had a feeling of anger. And then they start focusing on what should I do differently. So parents are really afraid to come forward with how they're feeling about things, because it makes them look like they don't care. There were days I didn't want to get out of bed because I didn't want to deal with it anymore. That doesn't mean I didn't love my kids. I just didn't want to deal with it. And so if we start normalizing this more, and people start hearing this more, then parents are going to accept it and deal with it easier. If we say, being angry is okay. Of course, we also have to teach people how you react, how you deal with that anger. But there's not one of us in this room who don't get angry sometimes.
See, I was just kind of like, and I'm looking at that, and I see it because I worked with a family, a lady that had a Down syndrome and had, so it was a normal, child close to the same age, and almost like a denial type thing, because she wanted to keep them as infants instead of letting them grow and mature and encourage them to, because just because they have this diagnosis does not mean they can't do anything. And she wanted to be convinced that she's constantly sick, and that was like really tough, that they're just as normal as the next child. It's encouragement, you know, and that was tough for me. I would say, trying to get her to recognize this child being, you know, Downs did not make this child an infant for the rest of her life. And that was just like pushing, encouraging.
But
And
it's
then,
often what they hear
Yeah.
is what they won't ever do.
well, and it didn't help that, you know, she has some slight learning disabilities also, but it was a struggle. I you know, and letting them, that they can use silverware. It may not be pretty, but encourage that, you know, encourage each step and praise each step. And that, I mean, it was kind of like almost the opposite type thing, you know, because she chose to just to like go, okay, you know, she can't do anything.
And it is, and I would guess that she was going through the grieving process
Right.
because of
right.
the denial piece of it in a way. But the other piece of that is we often hear from families of, why can't Johnny be just like his brother Sam? Okay, I have 5 sisters, and not one of us are the same. And all 5 of us took different paths in our lives. All 6 of us took different paths in our lives. So why do we, when we have kids, expect our kids to be the same? Because they're not going to be. And that's what, you know, you definitely need to focus on. Everything my daughter did was a miracle in my life because she survived. So everything was we celebrated. But it's hard to accept that at the beginning phases of it and letting them do that and and accepting them for who they are.
Encourage her, just like, you know, that, yeah, it's okay.
I don't believe any child is ever a mistake, so they are who they are. And it's up to us as the adults to help others deal with it. That's just mine. I don't know how long I don't know what time it is, but I didn't think it'd take an hour and a half. What time is it?
Right there, it's almost 2.
Oh, is it? Well, it's an hour, so.
You go.
So does anybody have any questions, comments?
Great topic, and you presented it very well. Thank you.
I think it's important to also bring up the fact that some parents may not realize that they're even going through a grieving process.
No, absolutely not.
That's a good start.
How do you suggest like approaching them with that?
That's when you have to start, when they start learning to talk about their feelings with you, then you can start picking out pieces of it. If you hear a parent say over and over, I just don't want to get out of bed, we know they're going through a depression and feeling isolated. So we need to get in there and do something to get them out of bed.
Yeah, because there's something about that realization, so they know this is a normal process that they're going through, and it kind of gives them a roadmap. I mean, it can.
And then if they start saying, no, this isn't true, this diagnosis isn't my child, that's when I encourage parents to start to research it, is their child or not. And then most of the time it does, so then it starts helping them. Well, yeah, this is real, I just need help. So it's giving them things to do to make it, that they can get through it.
I'm going to put everybody's certificates right in the back. So your names are on them. So.
Heather's in front of you.
I guess I can.
Well, thank you very much for letting me come.
Janice.